For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
Okay, looks like we are live, guys. Thank you for your patience in the chat, but I promise you it is going to be worth it. I am pumped for this one. This is now our second time. It's a blessing. We've got Professor David Mcqueen with us here today. We are going to be discussing the formation and erosion of the Grand Canyon. Evidence, undeniable evidence today, guys, for the global flood, the worldwide flood of Noah. I want to let you know, as always, we keep our lectures and our interviews interactive and engaging with the chat. So if there's any questions, objections, whether it's from critics or non-critics, please tag me with your, if it's an objection or something you just need clarification, try and word it in the form of a question. So before we get into it, I'll point out on Monday, we've got Dr. John McKay is going to be with us. And once again, we're going to be discussing evidence for the worldwide flood. So a lot to look forward to. Enough for me, though. I am going to introduce Professor David Mcqueen and George, both who are with me here today for this very important topic. Gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Good morning and good afternoon.
Thank you.
No problem, no problem. So why don't we get right into it? Professor David, you need no introduction. People really enjoyed, especially myself, we really enjoyed your first talk with us about a week ago. People are excited for this. So Professor David, why don't we get right into it?
Thank you very much. I was so glad to hear that my friend John McKay will be in on Monday. We are talking about the same fellow with the hat and lives in Australia, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
That's right.
Yep.
He and I have done field work in the United States together, and he's a fine fellow. There's his face.
There he is.
His hat. So that's good. Good to see him on Monday. I wanted to begin today with my geologist rock hammer here. Over my shoulder is my wife's sewing nook with a couple of posters that we may use before we're over about plate tectonics and the Earth's structure and so forth. But we want to begin by talking about the geology of the Grand Canyon. We're going to divide this discussion in roughly 3 20-minute segments. The first segment is a lecture that I have been giving for the last 30 years about the origin of the Grand Canyon, and we'll do that during the first 20 minutes. Then we're going to have a bit of an interlude with stories like, where in the world did I get a rock hammer with green tape for its handle? That has to do with finding this 50 years ago in Wyoming as a geology student, but we'll put that to one side. And then after we tell some of these lighthearted stories that deal with things like me being accused of being a dead Boy Scout in the Grand Canyon, that's an interesting story. We'll go beyond that to talk about a paper that Dr. Steve Austin and I have written along with Ed Holrud. Actually, it's Austin and McQueen and Austin and Ed Holrud and me here. This is a paper that has been published by Andrew Snelling as our editor in the Answers Research Journal. And so we'll be talking about an argument that I am developing for one of the theories for the erosion of the Grand Canyon. My colleague, Dr. Steve Austin, has summarized it this way. There are really only 4 ideas about the erosion of the Grand Canyon: a drainage spillover, an antecedent river Now, this is vocabulary from geomorphology, stream piracy, and flood drainage. So there are only 4 ideas. I'm going to emphasize only 2 of them today. The almost comical evolutionary view that the Colorado River, which is as wide as a football field and only as deep as the distance from home plate to first base, or rather the pitcher mound and first, 90 feet. So that'd be the distance from home plate to the first base, I guess. For those of you that don't know American baseball, it's clear I don't know either because I'm making the mistake here. But the point is, the idea that the evolutionists have that the erosion can be explained by the Colorado River is almost laughable. But we'll come by that in a few minutes, and I'll present an argument for the spillover theory for the erosion of the Grand Canyon. But let's get started with an introduction here that I wanted to give to myself and the family. If we could have the first slide now, please.
Coming right up, David.
Thank you, sir.
Just 1 second. Let me share screen here. And no problem. My pleasure.
We have worked on the technology since last week. So here we have my first slide. And as I've said, we're going to talk about Noah's flood today. We're going to talk about the deposition of the rocks in the Grand Canyon, essentially during the first 6 months of the flood. And then we're going to talk about the erosion of the Grand Canyon, what we call the spillover model, which occurs after the Great Flood. So it's after the full year of Noah's flood. We have some impounded lakes that we're going to talk about, and those lakes will then provide the massive amount of water needed to erode the Grand Canyon quite suddenly. I want to always circle back to the Lord Jesus when we're talking about the science of geology. It's important to me, and I want it to be important to Standing for Truth's audience, to see that evidences like the Grand Canyon give us proof of the authority of the Bible. My background, for some of you that were not here last week, is I've got a master's in geology from the University of Michigan, and I came back to Louisiana 33 years ago to get a degree in science education, and that's what you'll see there. I've included my email address here. If some of you next week would like to ask me questions in private. Okay, next slide, please. Here is 75% of my family, at least. Our oldest son couldn't come to this vacation on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And there's the Gulf of Mexico behind the group there. Why would I put a slide like this on at the beginning of a talk about flood geology? Well, it turns out that families are important to the Lord Jesus. Families and individuals, and I could name my children, Philip, who's not in the picture, Miriam, Andrew, and Deborah. I'll let you guess which of these guys are actually my sons. But the point that I'm trying to make is that what we feel about science, what we feel about geology, and Dr. Jason spoke with us about astronomy, and we could just go down the list. That's important for these grandchildren that you see in the field of view here, that they might grow up to put their trust in Christ. Next. So let's get right into it here. I hiked the canyon 5 times, in the 4 years represented there. There you see a group of hikers going down into the canyon. We would begin on a Saturday and hike down into the canyon slowly. Some of us moved slowly. Others wanted to make it a race, but I would take it very slowly. And I would teach my hiking group as the years go on the different layers of the Grand Canyon. And we're going to emphasize just 3 today for simplicity. You see in the distance there a very clear, flat, white layer. That's called the Coconino Sandstone. And it's the about the thickness of what I think a soccer, is it called a soccer pitch, a rugby pitch? What's the correct word, George? I don't know the correct word for things outside of American football.
Oh, George, I think you're on mute, brother.
Soccer is correct, David. Yeah.
So it's about 100 meters thick.
Correct.
And that would be the length of a soccer pitch, I guess. And so notice that's called the Coconino Sandstone. And there are reptile and amphibian footprints in that layer, but no bones of the creatures. Think about that for a minute. And then if you look on the right-hand side, let's see if I can move my cursor and actually point this out. Is my cursor showing up?
I can't see it.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I can't do that. At any rate, on the right-hand side of the picture is a creek. There we go, right there. That creek is running down. And then if you move it a bit more to the north there, that's the actual canyon bottom itself, right in that area. And inside there is where you find what's called the great unconformity between the Cambrian rocks, the what's called the Tapete sandstone, and the Vishnu schist and other rocks without fossils. And then midway down, and we'll have other shots of this, we're going to talk about the carbonate in the Grand Canyon, which is the red wall limestone. So come back to me now and let me fill the screen with some Play-Doh here and some preliminary comments. The consistency of the rocks by the time the flood was over is very similar to the modeling compound, Play-Doh, which I have been studying, ironically, for over 50 years as far as the rock mechanics go. Now, engineers in our group, I know George understands this, when you look at a modeling clay like this and begin to press it, you can talk about how it deforms by using words like shear strength, Young's modulus, compressive strength, and so forth. And it turns out that the rock mechanics of the rocks in the Grand Canyon were very similar to these groups of Play-Doh. So if we say that this is the Tapete sandstone sitting on the bottom of the pile of sedimentary rocks, and we're going to bring out our Australian witch's hat here, or safety cone. I've got my safety vest on. And if we put these together, we can create what would be called an angular unconformity. Now, the reason I bring out the safety cone is we got to be careful here. And the reason that we have to be careful is that the evolutionary community makes a big deal about angular unconformities, as they should. But one of the things that they don't spend enough time talking about is in the Grand Canyon. Let's add another layer here to our layer. In the Grand Canyon, you do indeed have the Cambrian rocks at the base. But as you go up the canyon, through the rocks, you don't have all of carry out some dinner, Miss Penny Pearl. Do you know how to memorize this? Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, carry out some dinner, Devonian, Miss Penny Pearl, Mississippian, Pennsylvanian, Permian. My delightful freshman geology professor at Tennessee, Dr. Walls, now gone to his reward, taught that poem, Carry Out Some Dinner, Miss Penny Pearl, to Johnny Clock the Queen, Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, Tertiary, Quaternary, the Queen. He told delightful stories. He would be on a streetcar with his wife in San Francisco, and generally drunk former students would come up to him and say, carry out some dinner, Miss Penny. And they knew the poem, no idea that it related to Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian. So there's a little humor, George. But the point that I'm trying to make is as you go from the Cambrian rocks up through the top of the Grand Canyon, there are what are called non-conformities or paraconform. There are a bunch of words that are used for these things, but it's not an angular unconformity like this, where clearly something has happened down here. These are missing layers. There are millions of years of missing layers in the Grand Canyon. Now that constitutes a real problem for the evolutionary explanation of the rocks of the Grand Canyon. Let me pull over a watch here so I can make sure that I'm using my time wisely. So let's go on. Next slide, please.
David, the
Yes.
interesting part about what you said about the missing layers,
Yes.
if they were eroded, there'd be some evidence of erosion, but there isn't.
Yes, and we're going to see the truth of that in a moment when we get to a close-up of the Coconino sandstone. Very good point. Next.
Yeah.
The Grand Canyon and the rocks that it contains are evidence of the judgment of the Great Flood. And this is something we need to pause about. Genesis 1 and 2 and 3 clearly outlines the sin of Adam and Eve and forms the foundation of all of our sinfulness. Jesus, as the creator, was offended by this pre-flood world, so that at the end of the time, most Bible scholars believe that Methuselah, who lived 969 years, died the same year of the flood. So he would have been the 9th person on board the ark, but there were only 8 people on board the ark as a remnant that was saved, where the ark becomes a symbol for the salvation through the Lord Jesus. But let's not miss the point of the third bullet. Sin always requires judgment somewhere down the line. We'll need to ask ourselves whether the evolutionary community doesn't like the worldwide flood because it brings their faces against a mirror where they have to look at their creator. More on that later. Next. I was privileged in the mid-'80s to have the late Dr. Henry Morris and the late Dr. Dwayne Gish as two of my bosses at the Institute for Creation Research. The way that Dwayne Gish went down into the canyon was on this mule train here. I'd be curious later on for a raise of hand among the viewership to know if anybody has ridden these animals down in the canyon. I chose not to do it because I grew up in the city and large farm animals make me nervous, so I'd rather walk. Next. When Dr. Gish would see a trilobite, And I apologize for not making that image bigger, but that is a trilobite like it's found in the Tepete sandstone of the Grand Canyon. When Dr. Gish would talk about this all from the 70s through the last year of his life, he would say, what is important about a fossil? Well, it appears abruptly and fully formed. Next. Now, what does that mean? And again, I apologize for the small font here. I met Dr. Gish and Dr. Morris at a debate at the University of Tennessee in the mid 70s, that should read. When Dr. Gish would talk about the abrupt appearance of fossils in the Grand Canyon, what he would mean by that is it appears that these creatures were alive and well, not evolving as Charles Darwin would have suggested, but rather were buried by this catastrophic water event of the Great Flood. What did he mean when he said they were fully formed? Well, he would mean by that they have been created, not evolved. Okay, let's go back to my picture here and let me show some additional Play-Doh models of the canyon and explain a very important detail using these different layers. So imagine the layers that you see there, the bottom layer and then going up through the canyon, through the other layers. I really should reverse this. Sandstone on a geologic map, like here's my postcard size geologic map of the United States. The yellow that you see there is generally the uppermost part of the layer cake, like you're baking a birthday cake. You can see right here, let me put my finger on it. My finger is about where I live in Louisiana, and these yellow rocks going up the Mississippi River are called the Mississippi Embayment. And they are, for the most part, unconsolidated sands and silts. But as you go out west and you see this shade of yellow out in the Rockies and near where I think we can see the Grand Canyon on this map. Yep, there it is. The Grand Canyon is out in the western part of the United States. On maps, clastic rocks, which is another name for sandstones and shales and so forth, are generally depicted by the color yellow. Since I'm going to talk in a minute here about the coconino sand, I'm going to change my order. Where the pink is the Tepete sandstone, the green is the red wall limestone, and the yellow is the coconino. Okay, next. Let's go to the next slide, please.
Okay, coming right up, David. Just 1 second.
No problem. We've got 15 minutes left on this formation of the Grand Canyon, and then we'll move on. But I want to make sure that our audience is clear on this. Next. Okay. When we focus on the Grand Canyon and the Genesis flood, here is a view from the south rim of the canyon looking to the north. And you see a very prominent group of red sedimentary rocks. And then you see the white coconino sandstone near the horizon there. And then you go down stratigraphically, down, all the way to the Tepete sandstone. But let's focus on that white layer that we see there. Now, let's keep in mind some distances here. We're essentially looking from the south rim of the Grand Canyon across, and depending on where you are, it's 10 miles, 15 miles across to the what's called the north rim of the Grand Canyon. My colleagues at ICR, my colleagues at AIG people like Steve Austin, people like Andrew Snelling, they have hiked both the south and the north rim. My focus was always on the south rim of the canyon. So as you look across there, you see the Coconino sandstone. Now, when I went through my training, undergraduate at Tennessee, graduate at Michigan, both of them in the 1970s, I would ask my professors, tell me about this Coconino. Oh, McQueen, that was an ancient beach that moved across most of Colorado and Arizona and Utah. You know, they go through this whole list. And then, next slide. Beginning in 1976, I actually got to go out and see it. And can you see the white layer there? Maybe someone can put their cursor and put the cursor on the bottom of the white layer. Let's see if we can get a cursor moving. I can't move my cursor. Oh, yeah, there it is. Oh, there we go. Yes, that's the bottom of the Coconino. And then move your cursor up 100 yards or 100 meters. And there's the top of the Coconino. Wait. Look at this, audience. Do you see any of the sand dunes like you see at a beach in California or the east coast of Australia or beaches in the south of France? No, you don't see any sand dunes. You don't see any evidence of erosion. It looks like this was laid down with what might be called knife edge contacts. Now, where the cursor is now, move it around so everybody will catch it by the eye. Yeah. Now look, move it back up to that contact. That's called a knife edge contact. It goes immediately into the next group. Now, where's the erosion of the millions of years that it took to deposit these? Now, furthermore, keep in mind that in the Grand Canyon, we're going from the Cambrian at the bottom, not all the way up through the Mesozoic and the Cenozoic. So it's a false idea that a lot of people end up with that the Grand Canyon contains the complete geologic column. What you've learned probably in the past is called the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, and the Cenozoic. It's not true. It's not there in the canyon. There are not only missing layers, but there's also missing time. You have to keep going north in the western part of the United States up into other monuments out there, other state parks, to be able to find the rest of the rock record. As a matter of fact, let me make a couple of preliminary comments, and then we've got 10 minutes left here, and we'll stop for questions about the deposition of the canyon. Let me make sure that you're clear on this point. There are probably only 12 places on Earth where you have a canyon a mile deep. And so here you've got 10, 15, 20, depending on where you are, miles across, and then you've got it being a mile deep. Now, that's a tremendous amount of erosion, and we can return another time perhaps to where all that beat up limestone, sandstone, shale, and so forth ended up. But the point is, this is a very unique place, the Grand Canyon. Probably only 12 other places. A creation geologist he writes under the nom de guerre John Woodmorape, but his real name is Jan Peczkus, first generation Polish guy. And he, for many, many years, was unmarried, had all kinds of time on his hand. So he actually went to the university and tried to find out, was there any place on Earth where the entire column from Cambrian all the way up through the Quaternary, Eocene, Oligocene, and so forth, where would you find that? So let me play a game with my newfound friend, George. George, you answer that question. Guess which continent you actually do have in one place the entire column.
Oh, you got me there. I don't think. No. Actually, I do know the answer. The entire column doesn't exist.
Well, it turns out that it's true for 99% of the earth. Ironically, there is a place in North Africa in the Atlas Mountain. My dad fought in World War II and was in Casablanca that I want to go back there. I hope they're not still shooting at Americans all these years after World War II. But at any rate, I hope to go back sometime and look in Morocco. There's supposed to be one place you can find it. But we're getting off topic here. Next. Okay. Sedimentary rocks are broadly divided into two categories. I'll treat you all like my university class, Geology 101. I was teaching that at George Mason University part-time the month that Mount St. Helens erupted. What an interesting teaching tool. But at any rate, in Geology 101, all sedimentary rocks are divided into two broad categories, what are called clastics and carbonates. And so here is the red wall limestone of the Grand Canyon, and it is a carbonate, limestone, dolomite generally. Clastics are rocks that have been broken up, like sandstone and siltstone and shale. So both clastics and carbonates are found in the Grand Canyon. My theory regarding the precipitation of the red wall limestone is that it was a direct precipitation from the ocean that I'll call it Noah's Ocean during this time as the ark was floating above the top of the ocean, floating above the ocean as this erosion was being done. Somehow in this part of Colorado and in many other places in the world, there was just the right pH and temperature and EH. Some of you may have forgotten your high school chemistry. It turns out that EH gives you some relation of the electrical conductivity and resistivity and so forth in a column of water. We'll leave it at that now. But I believe the red wall limestone here, if you had the right geochemical conditions, could easily precipitate out, not in millions of years, but in a matter of days. Next. Now we're going to return at the end of the conversation here to the spillover model, but you might as well look at this slide. In the future, I'll try to blow this up into segments, but I think if you look closely at the slide, you can see the Colorado River there and its drainage all through these western states. The Colorado River flows. Many people misunderstand that it's flowing through Colorado, but it's actually flowing through the area of the Grand Canyon, which is south of Vegas in the state of Arizona. But at any rate, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, and if you would move your cursor in a circle around the upper right-hand corner, the northeast end of the canyon there, just do a big circle there. The spillover model for the erosion of the canyon is basically the idea that there was a lake, an impounded lake, that historically in the study of this has been called Lake Hopi. My colleague, Dr. Steve Austin, would like to substitute a word that's a new word for many of you. It's also known as Lake Bittahoche. I'll leave it to you to guess the spelling of that Indian name. But the first geologist, according to our abstract here, the first geologist ever to explore the Grand Canyon was a guy named John Newberry. And in 1861, we're not talking about ideas here that came about just a few weeks ago. For all these years, people like John Newberry recognized that the Grand Canyon was carved through a highland arch that separated topographic basins. Newberry proposed drainage spillover of the elevated terrain by what has later been called Lake Hopi or Lake Bittahoche. And this paper that I have in my hand here, let's go back now to my screen. Okay, so here's this paper that we wrote. I've printed out not all of it, but I've printed out a bunch of it. And it's got, it printed out to 64 pages, and there's over 100 very extensive footnotes here in our paper. Very carefully edited by Dr. Steve Austin and Dr. Andrew Snelling. Where I come into this paper is my experience at the Institute for Creation Research when we used a discussion. We used for discussion Ed Hallrood's early map of this idea of Lake Hopi. And then I also come into this paper when we get down to the part about talking about other models, scale models, if you will, of the Grand Canyon. Many of you are aware of Dr. Steve Austin's work at Mount St. Helens and the erosion in the ash and rock and so forth at the Grand Canyon forms a scale model for the Grand Canyon. I've been challenged by my co-workers, Steve and Ed, to pursue this. Afton Canyon controversy focused on a different model for Lake Mannix. If you go south of Vegas, you run into a river called the Mojave River. And as you walk upstream on that river, there is a theory that there was an ancient Lake Mannix that did the erosion of Afton Canyon. My wife and I, Lord willing, will be in Vegas visiting friends around April Fool's Day, April 1st next year. And I intend to do some field work in this Mojave River. And I'm certainly not going to go alone. So if you'd like to join us, you can certainly do that. It turns out that the USGS has been dealing with this, what they call Afton Canyon controversy, since 2014. So now, how to summarize this before we go to questions? The best explanation for the rocks of the Grand Canyon, whether it be the Tapete sandstone or the Red Wall limestone or the Coconino sandstone on top, is a catastrophic worldwide flood over a several-month period, laying these rocks down. In my presentation today, we'll simplify it by taking a break at Genesis chapter 8 and verse 1. If you read the verses before in chapter 7 and then the verses into chapter 8, you'll see that the floodwaters rose for essentially 6 months. And then, to use the lovely King James vocabulary, assuaged or went down during the final 6 months. And so the formation of the rocks of the Grand Canyon are not only may they be explained by Noah's flood, their explanation is best in a flood model. I've given you 20 minutes worth of arguments. Hours and hours of additional argument can be used for the formation of the rocks of the Grand Canyon during the time of the Great Flood. When you expand that to the geologic map of the United States, and you look at the pink on this map, and you look at the blues and all the other colors that you see here, it turns out the geology of the United States is best explained by the worldwide flood. I'll pause there, and George, help me to find some questions that the Standing for Truth group have already submitted, and let's talk about that some.
Well, yeah, I've got a couple for you.
Please.
With that carbonate layer, I believe it's made up of micritic carbonates, micron-sized particles. I think they're about a millionth of a meter, and they're micron-sized bacteria. Our cells are 10 microns in size, so these little critters are very, very small.
Yes.
And according to secular explanations, that carbonate layer there, David, apparently was deposited at 6 inches per 1,000 years. And I go back to that question I posed to you in the previous discussion we had about the nautiloids.
Yes.
How do nautiloids get buried in the standing position when you've got a deposition of 6 inches per 1,000 years?
Yeah. And this is a wonderful argument, Brother George. Did you see very much erosion at the top and bottom of even the red wall limestone? So we have
that was my next. Hold on, that was my next question. Don't go too fast.
Oh, sorry. Let's go back to now. For those of you that don't read the same things that George do, you need to understand that carbonate rocks are divided into categories. There are types of carbonate rocks, and not only dolomites and limestones, but within the limestones, there's a type of limestone that's called a micrite. Now, we could all meet in the Bahamas when it opens up again, and we could go to Andros Island, and we could actually walk out, George. I don't know if you're aware of this, but you can walk out in the Bahamas into micrite mud. It's an exact analogy to the micrites in the red wall limestone and rocks of the Southern Appalachians and other things I've seen in my life. So your point's very well taken. If this is supposed to be a slow deposition, how in the world could this happen? But if these micritic muds are precipitating out, but what I mean by that is the calcium carbonate, the mineral in the limestone, precipitating out and trapping these fossils.
Now, the question...
If that can be explained through geochemistry, it can happen very rapidly, George.
Yeah. Now, my question on erosion, according to secular geology, mainstream science says that erosion occurs at 6 centimeters per 1,000 years. I'd like to take this opportunity. In our oil exploration video, I actually said 60 centimeters. No, I meant to say 60 millimeters, which is 6 centimeters. But okay. based on that, David,
yes.
Did you notice the edges of the canyon? If you think that canyon was 70 million years old, do you think those edges would be rounded off by now?
Yeah, very good point. Keep that question from Redefined Living up there. And let me comment on George just at the end. Your point's very well taken, that whether you're talking about the formation of the red wall limestone or the knife edge contact at the top of the canyon between the Coconino sandstone and the units underneath it, you've got a remarkable situation here where if what I was taught at Tennessee and Michigan, that this Coconino sandstone is essentially a beach migrating for millions of years across the western United States, Arizona and so forth, we're the sand dunes. Every beach I've ever been to has got sand dunes leading down from the highest berm down to the water level. Is that what you've seen also, George?
Yes. The other point I wanted to make was, and I only found these out last night, by the way. Did you know that the Grand Canyon sees the most lightning? Apparently, now take note of this: 15,000 strikes actually hit the rim of the canyon, and it's considered one of the characteristics of erosion. I never thought about lightning as a contributor to erosion, but imagine 15,000 strikes per year times millions of years, what damage or what erosion that would have had to the rim of the canyon.
This statistic is troubling me. You know, Dr. John Morris was the president of ICR back in my day, and he never told me that I need to worry about that mean lightning strikes. I might not have even led tours there because we always started on the rim, sometimes in the rain. And so I would have actually worried about that. But isn't it silly to think of lightning hitting a sandstone and bumping off what, 100 or 1,000 grains, probably turning them into glass, I would guess. What a silly idea to even consider that with the idea of erosion.
Yeah, I'll be making a video on what we know as fulgurites. You know what fulgurites are? That's when lightning hits the ground and creates that glass tube, if you like.
Oh, yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Let me read Redefine Living's question, and we'll talk about that. If the Grand Canyon took millions of years to form, how come we don't find Grand Canyons everywhere around the world? Why are the exception and not the rule?
That's a good question.
Excellent question. And I'll go back to a statistic I spoke earlier, and that is that there are only 12 places on Earth that there's anything that even comes close to the Grand Canyon. Apparently, there's an enormous canyon in the Atlas Mountains of Morocco. And so you can go down the list. There are not many places like this. And if it were the case that a river like the Ohio River or the Mississippi River, I live a 1-hour drive from the Mississippi River, which forms the border between the state of Louisiana and the state of Mississippi. At that point, the Mississippi River is 1 mile wide. How come there's no Grand Canyon up around Memphis? Or if you go to the Ohio River, the confluence of those two rivers are at a place that you can read about in Mark Twain's books, Cairo, Illinois. How come there's not a Grand Canyon that runs along the Ohio River? So the point's very well made.
Okay. The next question.
Next question here.
One.
Are
From
those
Straight Talk TV. And Professor McQueen, what I'll do is, just so I don't lose the questions that are coming in, people are really loving this. I'm loving this. So much good information. What I'll do, so this is the next question. Once you read it, take your time to answer it, and then I'll grab the next question and flash it up.
I'm trying to save my voice for the next hour. Could you read the question, please?
Of course, yeah. So question from Straight Talk TV. Thank you so much for your question. Are those stone formations continental wide, or are they local?
Excellent question. And one of my theological buddies, he and I spent many years arguing about the way the Bible uses the word stone versus rock. Stone, I think of as almost a poetical term, but it is the word used in Scripture, like the stone that the Jerusalem stone that the temple were made of and so forth. So it's a good word, but I would use the word rocks. Are the rocks there found continent wide? The answer is yes. Let me give you an example from my experience. I studied 5 different times the Tapete sandstone. I myself never found a fossil in it. My wife always finds fossils. I should have taken her with me, but I never found the trilobites, but they're there in the literature, and they appear abruptly and fully formed. I never saw any evidence of transitions. I would challenge the people on the hike. I said, we can actually test one of the chapters in Origin of Species. We can look for this mystery of the transitional organisms and the tree of life that Darwin put together. Never found them. The Tapete sandstone is the equivalent of the Rome shale in the Southern Appalachians. My training at the University of Tennessee took me out to the Rome shale. It's sometimes a sandstone in Tennessee. The Chickamauga, the Knox group, which is the equivalent of the Red Wall limestone. So there are equivalents of these all across America and the world. I would refer you to Dr. Tim Clary of ICR's new book, Carved in Stone, where he takes stratigraphic sections from oil well data and shows that these rock formations are extensive worldwide. Okay, go ahead and read the Luca question to me there.
Awesome. And thank you, Professor McQueen, for answering these questions so thoroughly and great answers as always. Luca, thank you so much for your question. He asks, how can, real quick.
Conductivity.
Yeah, real quick. My screen froze up real quick. Okay, here we go. How can conductivity influence the deposition process? There is I think he's asking, is there a paper / experiment for me to read / see?
Okay, let me address that. Let me think about the best way to do it. Let's do it this way. Okay, here's my water bottle, halfway done. And the pH of this water, bottled water, should end up being somewhere around 7. Recall that pH goes from 0 to 14, from acid to base. And so that's the pH that we're talking about in the flood water, in the flood waters. The temperature is obvious. Here in Louisiana, we're having a cold snap, George. It may get down to 40 degrees tonight. We're all dressed up. We're freezing down here because we're not used to this kind of cold weather. I'm sure others of you are experiencing snow on the ground right now. So you know that temperature affects water, but this conductivity that I talked about is the electrical property, what's called the EH. You know how pH is lowercase p and upper H? Yes. EH is capital E, lowercase h. At any rate, these chemical parameters, salinity and so forth, are going to affect the amount of carbon dioxide gas in a moving slurry of calcium carbonate. Now, why is that important? All of these chemical parameters affect whether carbon dioxide remains in solution, becomes a gas, or actually combines with calcium to form calcium carbonate. You can write out the equation on the sheet of paper in front of you. CaO plus carbon dioxide, CO2, that reacts to form calcium carbonate. That's an idea of how this affects it. The electrical properties, the salinity, the pH of the water, the temperature of the water, all those are factors which affect the formation of limestone. Okay, the Bible Club question. Read that one to me.
Doki Doki Bible Club, thank you so much for the $5 super chat. We appreciate it. God bless you. Question is, why do geologists allow for a possibility of local water catastrophe in many places, but never everywhere at the same time?
This is sure an excellent question. You should give her the $5 back. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, it's such a good question. I have to pause. Um, let's take this Play-Doh stack that I've done, and let me get into my geologist pocket here. I think that in this pocket, that's the wrong pocket. I'm looking for a knife to cut my Play-Doh with. There we go. So here is my knife, which TSA never sees. It's always in my suitcase. So we can erode the Grand Canyon by doing it this way. So here is the beginning of the erosion of the Grand Canyon. And so you can see how it's cut in this way. Well, what evolutionary geologists do is they'll take one piece of the Coconino sandstone, but it gets worse than that. They'll get a part that's near the Bright Angel Trail in the Grand Canyon on the South Rim, and they'll look at that little piece and they'll say, oh, let me use my knife to make footprints in this. I ought to be able to do this where you can actually see it at the Bible Club. Can you see a small footprint there?
Yes.
George, can you see it?
Yes.
And they'll say, oh, how was that preserved? That was a local catastrophe that quickly buried that underneath more. And so you preserve this footprint by a local catastrophe. Well, as you go worldwide, dinosaur footprints, the footprints of amphibians, and so forth, when you walk on the beach, as I do with my grandchildren, when the next wave comes in, their little footprints are gone, aren't they? And so you have to have at least a local catastrophe to explain these kind of footprints. Now, the end of that question is purpose. Is a wonderful, purposeful thing. The end of that is I was a Boy Scout assistant scoutmaster for 20 years, so we always got to close the knife there. I get distracted. They accept these local catastrophes, but if they think globally about it, they realize, as Derek Auger said, that the geologic record, the stratigraphic record, is like the life of a soldier, my dad in World War II. It's long periods of boredom and brief periods of horror and catastrophe. They don't connect the small bits of data with the entire world. Why? If you look at it globally and you look at it honestly, it shows that Genesis 6, 7, and 8 can be trusted. There was a worldwide flood. Well, for heaven's sakes, if there was a worldwide judgment that left only 8 people alive at the end of it, there may be a creator that I'm accountable to. And a lot of my geology buddies that are atheists and evolutionary humanists and geologists, they don't want to admit that they're going to have to give an account to a righteous God.
David,
yes.
Can I just add something there?
Please.
In the Bulletin of Geological Society of America, volume 44, pages 951 to 964, in the Proceedings of the Paleontological Society of 1933,
yes.
they actually cite bird footprints near Nova Scotia in a Carboniferous layer. Now, for those that aren't aware, Carboniferous is 300 to 360 million years old, and that's around 200 million years before birds were supposedly evolved from dinosaurs.
Yes.
And they classify these as ooparts, meaning out of place fossils. However,
really?
I'd like to say it's not the fossil that's out of place. It's the theory that's out of place.
No, good point. Good point. The Carboniferous vocabulary that George just used. Let's go back to carry out some dinner, Miss Penny Pearl, Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Mississippian, Pennsylvanian. In most of the world, the old British vocabulary has been carried. You know, on my map here, I'm going to put my finger near Pennsylvania and the Mississippi River. You see the blue there? My finger is on the Mississippi River here. The blue there is the Mississippian and Pennsylvanian, what most of the world calls Carboniferous. Go ahead, George.
Okay, look, Stanning's out for 5 minutes, he just informed me. So he asked me to read the next question to you.
Thank you.
This is from Godzilla Freak. His question is, the tiny amount of climate change in our current day causes rivers to disappear. Wouldn't rivers in deep time be destroyed by vast climate change?
Yeah, very good point. Let me use some work I've been doing on the Mississippi River drainage. I've been doing some study about how the Mississippi River, that if you add to it the Ohio and you add to it the Missouri, is one of the major river systems on Earth. How can we understand that in light of flood geology? Some secular or traditionally trained evolutionary humanists believe that the west bank of the Mississippi River at a certain point was near Dallas, Texas, and has moved east during time. I've been studying this at an archaeological site near the Mississippi River in Louisiana called Poverty Point. And so the point that is made here by Godzilla Freak is very well taken. If you look back in the history of geology, the history of the Mississippi River, how come the Mississippi River wasn't destroyed at a certain point? How come very large rivers, like one of the rivers that we can use this as a transition here to talking about the erosion of the Grand Canyon. One of the rivers that the evolutionary community has been looking for years is called, depending on which paper you read, the Crooked Ridge Miocene River upstream from the Grand Canyon. I think it's talking about the canyon there, but it's certainly the case. Oh, here we go. Yeah. The critics of the catastrophic view of the erosion of the Grand Canyon have been looking for what they call the Miocene River for 150 years. This would be northeast of the Grand Canyon, I guess. They can't find it. The reason they can't find it is that the spillover model is true. Okay, may we make the transition now to talking about the erosion of the canyon?
Can I just add one more, David?
Yes.
I recall reading somewhere, I can't remember where it was, that the volume of eroded material from the Grand Canyon was around 1,000 cubic miles, I believe, and they can only actually attribute around 1% at the delta. And if this occurred over 70, if the erosion occurred over 70 million years,
yes,
where's the 99% of the material?
Well, I'll give you a couple of thoughts about that. If you go to the gray below my map here, let me get it oriented. The gray, I've got to put my finger on it so I don't get lost here. The gray in this part of the map is Baja California. And this whole area that forms a canyon between Baja California and Mexico itself, the western part of Mexico. Some geologists that have taught me over the years have said, oh, all that sediment went down into Baja California. It completely went past the south. Well, let's use it completely went past the western end of the Grand Canyon and went down there. Well, you see, if they suggest that sort of thing, they might as well be suggesting a catastrophic movement of that sediment, as you have pointed out. The ordinary calculations can explain only a small amount. Lena, thank you for your compliment there. We'll add you to the Christmas card list. Okay. Anything else, George, before we move on?
No, that's about it for my questions.
Yeah, we can move on. Great questions from everybody, guys. So
okay, let's go ahead and move on to this. And let me give you a word of how I got involved in this. I haven't shared with you any of the lighthearted stories from hiking the Grand Canyon. So let me tell one lighthearted story, and then I'll move into the vertical bulletin board that we had at the Institute for Creation Research, and how that ties in to Steve Austin and Ed Hollywood. By the way, having grown up in the South, I'm probably not even pronouncing my friend's name right. It's Holroyd. He's got a doctorate and he lives in Colorado. So, Brother Ed, I apologize for mispronouncing your name. The story, here's a great story, George. Year after year, we would lead tours in the canyon. Sometimes I would lead them, and sometimes I'd be a co-leader. And this particular year, I was leading with Dr. Larry Vardaman, delightful man who hiked the canyon many times. And Dr. Vardaman and I started down, and ordinarily we would make a rule that tell us how much you weigh, 100, 200 pounds, and we will allow you to take a backpack that weighs 1/3 your body weight. So a 18-year-old college co-ed that weighs 100 pounds, you can do the math, George. She would be able to carry a pack of what? 1/3 of 100 is
33
pounds. 1/3 of 100 in pounds would be 33 pounds, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we had to monitor the weight. Well, an Alaskan fisherman joined our hike, came all the way from Alaska to hike, and he was an enormous man, very strong guy, probably weighed 300 pounds. And so we didn't measure his pack. It turns out the guy had brought for food cans of Alaskan salmon. I couldn't believe it. But at any rate, this guy was hiking, and he began to get sick. It's a mile down, and when you wind around and take a long time, it takes all day, obviously. And so about halfway down, he starts getting sick. I was the medic of this team, and so he actually was running a fever. And so Dr. Vardaman said to me, you stay here with him. We're going to have to break one of the rules of the Department of Interior, and you and our buddy here, you're going to have to sleep on the trail because he's too sick to make it. So we got halfway down, and we were on a trail which was a couple of feet wide. We spread out around it. My hiking buddies have accused me in the past of looking like the crash of a small aircraft. I spread my stuff out all over the place, and in those days, I had a red vest on, not this safety vest, and I would have patches on that vest. I'm a patch collector. My dad's patches from World War II, patches that I've collected. And so we hear this noise, and a bunch of fraternity guys are crashing up the trail, angry, cursing. And so they pass us and they go up. Well, it turns out that they had been skinny dipping, swimming nude in the Colorado River, and they had been fined by the ranger down there, and they had to get out of the canyon. We were being thrown out of the canyon. So to get back at the sick friend of mine and me, they reported to the ranger up at the top that there was a dead Boy Scout on the trail. And I felt sorry for this guy because he essentially ran down a half a mile of vertical, and he was so annoyed that I was neither a Boy Scout nor dead. So that's the dead Boy Scout story there. What do you think of that, George? I seem to have lost my audio here.
Sorry, I was muted. I forgot. Yeah, it was a very interesting story.
Okay, so that's Lighthearted. Now let's go on to the erosion of the canyon. Again, we've only got 30 minutes left here in the 2 hours. And so let's review the 4 hypotheses that have been put forward for the erosion of the canyon. And let's deal with 2 of them. Drainage spillover, antecedent river, stream piracy, and flood drainage. I want to deal only with the evolutionary view that the Colorado River eroded the Grand Canyon. And then I want to go on to the idea that Dr. Steve Austin introduced me to in the mid-1980s when I heard him lecture on this from the rim of the Grand Canyon. So it's a contrast between the Colorado River eroded it and the idea that there was a spillover from an impounded lake after the time of the Great Flood that eroded the canyon. So let's draw the contrast here. The Colorado River, as I said earlier, is around 100 yards, 100 meters wide generally, and let's use yards for the moment. And so its depth today is very shallow, actually, when you think about something like the Mississippi River. The Colorado River, as it goes through the Grand Canyon at the south rim, where the visitor center is only the distance from home plate to first base. You know, we're talking about tens of feet here. So you're trying to tell me that the river of that depth and width could have eroded a canyon that at places is 10 miles wide and a mile deep? And one part of the topography of the Grand Canyon, that this idea that the Colorado River carved it, that's very difficult, are what are called the side canyons, the alcoves. There are many alcoves in the red wall limestone, for example. And this theory of the Colorado River eroding it simply does not make sense. Earlier in preparation for today, I told George a story about a computer simulation that one of my professors at Michigan did in the early 70s, which purported to prove that the Colorado River could erode the canyon. Brother George, who's had a background in computer science like I have, made a very interesting comment to me about, what was it, George? You can set up the parameters of a program to do what?
To do anything. A programmer can actually simulate anything his imagination can wish for.
So what my professor was so proud of was actually an early video game from the 1970s. It's no different than my grandson playing the game Fortnite. So that's my critique of that traditional evolutionary view. Now let me turn to a positive view about the canyon. Are you able to go back to that last slide that I showed that showed the map of the Colorado River? I don't know. It's Standing for Truth is showing muted on my screen, so maybe he can't. Oh, here we go.
Yeah,
There we go. Thank you. Thank you for, go one back from that. Yeah, right there. Okay. No, not that one. One before that. Sorry. Yeah, keep it there for a moment. Can you fill the screen with that image? I wonder.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. There we go. So, again, those of you with the cursor in your hand, if you would circle the northeast quadrant of this map, the upper right quadrant of this map, just do a big circle with the cursor so people would see what I'm talking about. Dr. Steve Austin taught me in the 1980s that he had seen evidence of an ancient lake, and many others had seen it too. In the old days, it was called Lake Hopi. In the next 10 years, it might be changed to Lake Bittahoochee. But regardless, the idea is that as the floodwaters were receding from the North American continent, in that area northeast of the Grand Canyon, there was a dam, if you will, that produced a enormous lake. And then after the flood ended, there was a breach of that dam and a spillover of water. Now, go back to my screen and let me use the Play-Doh to make sure that people are not misunderstanding. So let's go back to filling the screen with me here in my Play-Doh, and I will illustrate what we're talking about. Keep in mind that at the end of the first 6 months of the flood, as the floodwaters were rising, all these units of the Grand Canyon were together like this. There might have been a crack there, but they were continuous. They were not laid down in this way. They were eroded into what we see today. And so what the idea of spillover is, and I'm going to pull the Grand Canyon apart and use my water bottle. My wife, Shirley, is a retired kindergarten teacher. She gets mad when I spill water on the kitchen floor. I would open my bottle and actually do this, but for the sake of my life, being married to a redhead, I won't do that. We can imagine the floodwaters hitting this and depositing it. Then this lake, which we'll put northeast of the Grand Canyon, breaches, goes down, spills over into the canyon, and erodes it. A huge volume of water spilling over for simplicity, I'll say the Coconino Sandstone here, spilling over that and eroding the Grand Canyon. And so that, in brief, is the idea of what was called the spillover theory. Now,
sorry, David, that was very well demonstrated by the event at Mount St. Helens as well.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And those of you that are familiar with Dr. Steve Austin's work at the Grand Canyon will be aware that there's a part of the Grand Canyon that is a model for there's a part of Mount St. Helens after the eruption, after the 80s went on, where there was a mini Grand Canyon at a certain scale. I'm going to be going around the 1st of April to the Mojave River, as I explained earlier, and going to be doing work there on the part that's called the Afton Canyon area. We're going to hike into there. And then there was a lake there called Lake Mannix that Steve and Ed have worked on that eroded that. But remember that we need to keep going back to a very interesting thing. Even though evolutionary geologists have been looking for this mythological Miocene river for 150 years to better explain the erosion of the Grand Canyon, if it's ever found, it really will be, according to Steve's abstract here, our abstract, would be the primary alternative to the spillover hypothesis. But we should remember an important fact. Creationist and evolutionist thinking about spillover continues to make a significant contribution to our understanding of the erosion of the Grand Canyon. You see, it's not just creation scientists that are thinking this. And so you can imagine that when we go to national meetings like the Geological Society of America in 2021, 2022, and so forth, and we rub shoulders with some of our old professors. Keep in mind, I finished at Michigan in 79. Most of these guys are dead now. That would make them creationists, wouldn't it? We won't go into that. If they're already, I got caught up in my joke about becoming a creationist when you die. Let me go back. The point I'm trying to make is that these men, if we were to talk to them,
Oops.
Oh, no problem. Just let him. His thing might be loaded, or he might just need to make his way back due to connection. Let me see. Exit screen. David, if you wanted to, or George, if you wanted to maybe just shoot him a text.
He's calling me now.
Okay, no problem. And we'll let him
hey, David.
get back in. We can consider this a brief intermission because we've been going for a while. I'll mute you, George. Okay, guys. So I see a few more questions coming in from the chat. Lots of good questions and feedback, guys. I'll definitely be sure to have Professor McQueen answer them in our next intermission.
Sandy?
Yeah, brother.
He lost the power. He's going to reconnect to the main power and re-enter the stream.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, just give him a.
We'll go through some chat here.
While we're waiting for him to come in, I'd just like to say to the listeners here, the Kaibab point, where the highest point at Grand Canyon and the plateau, there's a difference of about 1,600 meters. According to secular geology, the canyon took 70 million years to form. So if we and they always say that the Kaibab actually uplifted as the river was carving it. So if you look at 1,600 meters, divide that by 70 million years, that works out to 0.02 millimeters per year. But at the same time, they tell us that erosion rates are actually 6 centimeters per 1,000 years. That equates to 0.06 millimeters per year. So effectively, their own numbers are showing the erosion rate is 3 times as much as that uplift of 0.02 millimeters. So something doesn't, like in mathematics, we say QED, the left-hand side does not equal the right-hand side. So something's wrong there.
Yeah, those are some great points, Brother George. This has been a fascinating lecture so far, and I am pumped to have Professor McQueen on a number of times. We're going to be doing a whole series of these, and just looking at all this evidence, it's like, as 2 Peter 3 says, They are willingly ignorant. The scoffers are willingly ignorant of the flood because the evidence is overwhelming.
Yeah, and Standing, we might even be lucky enough to have another stalwart in Steve Austin. So maybe David can convince Steve to come on, and we can interview him as well.
It would be an honor and a blessing to have Dr. Steve Austin on to talk about these important issues. So definitely, I think David will help us with that. And I've got up on screen to remind everybody this Monday, George will be back with me as well to help interview PhD geologist Dr. John McKay. Now, he's going to be giving a presentation. We'll have some images, some slides. We'll make it interactive with the audience because when he's done his presentation, George, we'll do a Q&A as well. Ask him some questions. So that's going to be, I'm really looking forward to that one as well. And we're really close to confirming Bob Enyard as well. We'll be discussing some important topics with Bob.
Okay, David's calling me. Just on a second.
Guys, I'm sure you've all seen it by now, but if you haven't, and I'll say it's rewatchable. I've already watched it a couple times. So much great information. Dr. Jason Lyle, just a few days ago, evidence for young biblical creation, and it was amazing. I mean, we answered all the so-called best arguments, objections from the critics. So definitely check that one out. And thank you, Montaz, I should say. Guys, we had a bit of a late night last night. We had a good after show, a debate, discussion, touched on many good topics. I mean, genetic entropy, radiometric dating. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, Standing.
Yeah.
It looks like his computer's crashed on him, but we're going to do it via the telephone. So I'll put him next to my microphone, and he can continue on.
Did he? Okay, so because when we tried that last time, it seemed like there was a lot of bad feedback.
No, Standing. His computer's crashed completely.
Oh, I know. So that's why I'm saying, because the information's so good, should we stop it here and just consider it part one and maybe do part two in a couple days? Because I wouldn't want people to be.
Hold on. I'm trying to do two conversations. David.
Okay, so we'll let George talk to Professor McQueen there. I think what we'll do, since we've been going an hour and a half, we've had a ton of good questions. We may, worst case scenario, we may consider this part two. People can rewatch it. There's been a lot of information, a lot of good data presented. So it's a lot to absorb, and then probably do a part two. We'll probably end up having a 10-part series with this. So we'll see what George says.
And
okay, so he's still talking. Daniel Marston's. Yes.
Standing.
Yeah.
David's agreed, but he says, can he end it with a question from the audience?
Of course. Yeah.
Okay. David, we'll fire a question at you. So, Standing, if you've got a question.
Yeah. Let me. Okay. Let's see here. And the reason why, George, is because the information that Professor McQueen is giving us is so important and so good that I'd rather it be presented when he's, when his audio is best, for example. Yep. So let me find a question that we can end it on. We'll end it on a good note. Here we go.
David, here we go. Yep.
Question from Redefine Living. George, did you want to ask?
I'll read it, SFD, because I'm on the earphones. David, the question is from Redefine Living. His question says, did the Colorado River need to flow uphill in the beginning to get over the mountain range?
Okay, that's a very, very astute question, actually. in many of these other theories, and let me use the very simple idea that I was introduced to at Michigan and Tennessee, the idea that the Colorado River did actually erode the Grand Canyon. If you think through that in regard to the anticlines, the regional anticlines that are associated with that part of the Colorado Plateau, the evolutionary viewpoint would be forced to say that water ran uphill. Now, keep in mind that the spillover theory that I outlined solves that problem, if you will, in the sense that Steve Austin and Ed have very carefully researched and discovered elevations of this ancient lake bed northeast of the Grand Canyon. Put another way, there is objective stratigraphic evidence for this thing called Lake Hopi. When that barricaded end of it, when that you can think of it as an analogy to an earthen dam. When that burst and moved, there was such a force of water that getting over some of the structural geology that we see now in the Grand Canyon was not a problem at all.
Okay, good. Standing, what do you want to do now? We
Actually,
sort of end the stream and set up a part 2 where we can go through the rest of the theories associated with the erosion.
Yes, I think this has been
great.
Do you
know if next Saturday at this time is free? Could we meet again at 2 o'clock Central Time next Saturday?
I think that would be possible, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that would work. That would work perfectly. What we could do is...
I apologize for the technological snafu here, but I will endeavor to get it fixed by next Saturday.
Okay, David. Standing says we can do next Saturday, definitely. So same time.
Okay, good. And George, I need to rest my voice for at least 30 minutes, but could you call me back in about 30 minutes? I want to comment about a couple of things.
No problems, David. Thank you very much for taking the time to, what is it, over an hour and a half now. So, yeah, it's probably a good idea to give your voice a bit of...
Okay, so then, George, please, would you tell Professor McQueen how much I appreciate his time today? We're really looking forward to next week, and I'll be happy to set aside every Saturday at that specific time frame for Professor McQueen to come on and bless us with his information, his presentation. Oh, George. Okay, guys. So that concludes part 1. Hour and a half has flown by, guys. A lot of great questions, a lot of great feedback from the audience. And once again, reminder, this Monday, make sure you are here. Make sure you're here this Monday for Dr. McKay. And George, are you back, brother?
Yeah, sorry. There must be a glitch or something because I had some internet problems as well. It just disconnected for some reason.
Yeah, it's a blessing that I think we lucked out that we got an hour and a half of solid presentation free from any issues. So maybe that's a sign that we'll end part 1. And next Saturday, we're going to have David McQueen back on for part 2 of the Grand Canyon erosion, the global flood. So,
Yep.
Okay. All right, guys. Thanks for being here. Great questions. Thank you for the super stickers, the super chats, and we will see you Monday. Everybody, God bless. SFT
is out.
For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing